anytime AI is brought up, and I think right now this is very true, again, in a lot of organizations, it brings excitement, but also skepticism, because there is this whole, hey, is this going to replace my job? And so it's about having conversations around, no, it's not replacing your job, but it could change it. And we get to shape what that change looks like. We get to talk about what should this look like in not our current environment, but our future environment.
What do you think of when you hear the phrase people first technology transformation in the age of AI? Other than it's a big mouthful, you're probably rolling your eyes at the phrase because we've seen it before, and I'm sure we'll see it again, where plenty of people have thrown out those buzzwords, and the reality is vastly different from the theory of that phrase. What have we seen when we're talking about technology transformations in the age of AI? Usually it involves some CEO who's out of touch with what's going on in this organization, laying out an edict saying that we're going to be an AI first company. And that's often followed by a bunch of people getting laid off, and then whoever's remaining is told that they better be thankful that they have a job. That's what we've seen. That's what catches headlines. So the question becomes, is it even possible for you to execute this sort of transformation in the age of AI and still be people first in terms of culture and execution? That is the question that we're going to answer today. And the person that's going to help us answer it is Katee Van Horn. So what's Katee's story? Well, Katee is a global HR executive who specializes in developing strong leaders, fostering inclusion, and guiding organizations through complex change. And she's the chief people officer at WebPros and a co-host of the Inclusive AF podcast. She brings thoughtful, people-centered leadership to every conversation, and her work centers on helping teams grow, connect, and lead with intention. And the story that we're going to talk through today is about how she set the foundation for executing a people-first technology transformation in the age of AI. Katee, looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty interesting conversation because the overall theme of the conversation is how you execute a people-first technology transformation in the age of AI. That's a lot of words, and oftentimes those things don't go well together. In fact, they're often in opposition. So I think the first order of business is for you to give us a view into the landscape of the organization and what you're navigating from a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. My name is Katee Van Horn. I'm the Chief People Officer for WebPros. And right now we're in an interesting moment at WebPros. And I think a lot of companies can say the same. We've had years of acquisitions where we've built this team of incredibly smart, incredibly passionate teams, and they're worldwide. We have team members in over 51 countries. And this year, the focus is really about becoming that one WebPros. So making sure we're thinking about culture, systems, ways of working, and continuing to move in a very fast-paced, high opportunity, sometimes high chaos environment, and making sure that we're having that meaningful team member experience globally that's consistent, but also focusing on what are the outcomes and what are the things that we're trying to achieve. So regardless of whether you're in Houston, Barcelona, Mumbai, Cologne, Sofia, wherever it is, we're working on really big problems and really big stuff. And that's energizing, but it's a lot of work. And then layer on top of that, how is AI actually helping us or harming us?
So I want to set aside the AI part of the conversation for a little bit later because some of the other things that you're describing are challenging in and of itself. Because when you talk about an organization that's global, that's distributed, you're talking about aligning culture. And I think there's a portion of the company growth that involves acquisition. All of those things are challenging if you're just tackling them one at a time. So tell me about how you have navigated the process of aligning, given those variables. Give us a little bit of detail in terms of what the infrastructure looks like that's helped you do that successfully to this point.
I think for us, really, it's about making sure that we are always focused on those partners and customers first. So when we have acquisitions, thinking about what is the product impact, what is the customer impact, and then from there, also thinking about what is the team members' impact. So making sure that they have a similar experience to either what they've already had or enhancing it and hopefully enhancing it when they come into WebPros So really looking at what is that bigger picture of what does this addition by acquisition mean? And then what does that mean to the team overall? From a structure, infrastructure perspective, it's also about aligning teams as quickly as we can to their actual work product that they're doing. So if we're bringing in a new engineering team, aligning it to the current engineering team as quickly as we can in the right way, though, to make sure that everyone is able to learn more, grow their skill set, but also, again, as quickly as we can, bring that product onto our platforms or however we're going to set it up to make sure it's right and it's right for the customers and partners.
So I like your example that you're talking about bringing on development teams as quickly as possible and aligning them to the product. The
Mhm.
thing that I keep thinking about is when you're talking about a globally distributed team and you're talking about aligning dev teams across the globe in service of delivery of a product, that's easier said than done. So tell me a little bit more about how you've set up systems for success to allow for faster integration, faster alignment in a globally distributed employee landscape.
Absolutely. There are so many challenges that we always are looking at when we're bringing in an acquisition. And I will pull aside that regional differences, those language differences, those ways of working differences, and even just talk about the engineering or coding languages that are being used could be different, could be something that we have to bring people up to speed or change how we have worked on products in the past. And for me and for my HR team, it's really about thinking of who are those additions to the team? And what I like to do when we're having acquisitions is meet with the executives to say, what's great about your culture? What's great about the way that you all work together? And what's not so great? So bringing in the things that will be additions and will be helpful, but then also making sure we don't bring in stuff that isn't great. And an example of that is there might be something in the culture that the team says, we are very cutthroat or we don't look out for each other or whatever it might be. Hopefully that won't ever be an acquisition that we do, but it's possible. And so looking at that and going, how do we keep that out and make sure that doesn't come into our culture? But then also when we look at those regional differences and ways of working, the example I can give you is we have teams that were based in Russia. We've relocated them to Bulgaria, but they have a very much a top-down, the leader says this is the way we're going to do things and that's the way it's done. And so shifting the way that they worked to say, okay, we're in this together. We're all contributing. And how are we making sure that those contributions are actually impactful? And again, the right thing for our product, for our customers, and for our partners.
So, when you describe all of that, what comes to mind in my head, especially from the perspective of alignment to culture, is that a lot of this stuff has to be picked up asynchronously and on your own as far as a learning perspective. So, how have you set up the organization to allow for easier, I guess, onboarding or enculturation across these teams that have vastly different ways of operating?
We have done a lot of different things. So the onboarding process that we put in place, and it's an iterative process, so it's not perfect, and there's always going to be challenges, and we're always learning new things. But we've set up something that we can have just-in-time training. We can have do it at your own pace type training where people can learn a little bit more about Web Pros and all of our products and all of the things that we do. We've also really focused on culture and how do we create this, what we call one Web Pros culture that is who we are. And it's really about our identity. It's about our values. It's about making sure that people are working in the same way. And if they're not working in the same way, how do we work in that async environment to say, hey, you might work this way and this other team's going to pick it up and run with it in a different way. But how can we keep in communication and keep everyone in the loop? And really the key there is communication and making sure that everyone knows what's going on at all times. So using the tools at our disposal, Jira, Slack, et cetera, to make sure that there's a lot of communication and a lot of back and forth between product teams, marketing teams, engineering teams, et cetera, to make sure everyone is aware of what should I be working on today, but then also what's that bigger picture we're trying to address.
So I like that. I think the big things that stand out in what you just described is that you're putting your processes and your systems and accounting for different modes of learning. You're also putting in scaffolding or guardrails that allow for ongoing self-correction so that if you need to course correct very quickly, you have that in place as well. And then the other part that I like about what you just described is that it seems to be a regular part of the process to have mission alignment and big picture conversations are always front and center. So you stay aligned in terms of the direction that you're going on an ongoing basis. So that's really good stuff. So the foundation's there, and you're already talking about, all of these things in the context of a complex, globally distributed, acquisition oriented environment with aligning multiple cultures. Now add the AI layer onto it. So when you add that on top of it, what sort of challenges popped up that you didn't anticipate when you're adding the AI component into that culture?
I think anytime AI is brought up, and I think right now this is very true again in a lot of organizations, it brings excitement, but also skepticism because there is this whole, hey, is this going to replace my job? And so it's about having conversations around, no, it's not replacing your job, but it could change it. And we get to shape what that change looks like. We get to talk about what should this look like in not our current environment, but our future environment. And also, how do we think about AI as a remover of friction, automating some of those repetitive tasks and making sure that we're really improving based on what we learn, what the outcomes are. And so it's not about replacing people or replacing anything. It's really about how do we extend the capabilities of our team and the capacity of our teams and making sure that we're trying to be very transparent. We don't always get it right, but trying to be transparent about this shift from fear to curiosity and making sure we're really being thoughtful about how do we frame up how AI can be used and also using guardrails in AI to make sure that we're doing the right things and being thoughtful about if a human is touching it, what does that mean? And if a human isn't touching it, what does that mean? So really being thoughtful about how do we shift the narrative between, hey, this is going to take my job to what does it mean and how can it enhance what I do every day?
So I like the framing, or at least the changing of the mindset where you're having people rethink what their job might be in the future. But I want to hit rewind a little bit and think through this from a business perspective. Oftentimes, when you have organizations that have internationally or globally distributed teams, there's a certain calculus in that people strategy where you have people located across the globe to gain an advantage on your payroll. The numbers are the numbers because it might be more cost effective to hire staff out of Eastern Europe or wherever. There's
Mhm.
that calculation that comes into it. Now you add AI into that equation, and AI is marketed as, oh, this is going to wipe out entry level work or repetitive work for a lot of people. So when we're thinking about a use case where AI could be used, I could think of a scenario where on a dev team, and you add a layer of AI, the QA function disappears. So I'm sure there might be QAs or SDETs across the organization that are sitting there thinking, well, this is all great and all, but with AI in here, I'm going to be out of a job no matter what the marketing says. How do you respond to that sort of concern that might exist out there in the workforce?
So we're responding to it in real life right now. That's absolutely a real life example of something that we're being challenged by right now. And the focus and the way we've approached it is really to shift this SDET QA role into more of an engineering and a coder role to make sure that again, it's about developing people and growing their skill set. So it's not you're not going to have a job. It's how does your job change and how does it function differently in the future to make sure that you are improving your skills and doing what you still love to do, which is getting into the code and figuring out what the code is doing, but from a different perspective. But it's also about building engineers to think about quality, to think about how do I test what I'm doing? How do I make sure I'm thinking about this from a QA perspective as I'm writing the code? So it's a shift in not just the SDET role and the QA role, it's also a shift in the engineering role to say, hey, engineer, you're not going to have four people behind you looking at every a line of code that you write. You're going to have to really be thinking about this as you're writing your code yourself and testing it and making sure that you're doing peer coding or doing different ways of thinking about this from a QA perspective. Yeah, that's 100% a real life example of what we're going through right now. And I think from a where do we find the talent and you can find these entry level roles in other countries, I would push back on that a little bit because I think we have highly skilled workers in a lot of the countries that we're in. So it's not about, hey, we're going to put the low level work in other places, because we're finding amazing talent, whether that's engineers, marketing, whatever it might be, all over the globe. It's about really leveraging the skill sets and making sure that those skills are relevant to what we're trying to achieve, regardless of where they sit around the globe.
So that makes sense. I want to get into the philosophy a little bit because if when we're talking through how the job of an engineer changes, the job of an SDET changes, I start thinking about competencies of people that end up in that space. And right now I'm trying to fight the urge to nerd out because as an IT recruiter, this is like the stuff that I would talk about. Because QAs from a competencies perspective are supposed to have the wiring that demonstrates attention to detail, which is a core component of being a good QA. To be an effective developer, you index towards run fast and break things. I'm oversimplifying in large terms. But where this philosophical component comes in is I'm always wired to build teams that each individual on the team plays to their strengths. And what you're describing is developers now have to pay more attention to the things that probably drain their energy. So what I'm thinking about as we talk through this is you have elements of each job's function that's going to change. And some of those changes means that they're not playing to their strengths, but actually working more on their weaknesses, which could be an energy drain for a developer or a QA, depending on who you're looking at. So how do you bridge that gap where you're actually having to reshape to some level how people are wired in order to meet the demands of what this new future of work looks like?
So I'm going to answer this a couple different ways. So I think when we think about the future of work, for me, it is about an evolution, and that's for all of us. You as a recruiter, have you changed the skill set that you had from day one of being a technical recruiter? Of course, you've evolved, you've learned new things, you've learned the technology, you've kept up to speed on what are the things that will impact who I recruit, how I recruit, all of these things. And so I think there is going to be that shift, and I would hope that every person wants to develop their skills and wants to grow. Now, when it comes to playing to your strengths, of course, we want to make sure that we're thinking about that and keeping that in mind and looking at the competencies. Yes, there are different competencies that are required for the different roles, but I also think that's part of the shift that engineers will want to and do want to focus on. How do I make my code even better? How do I make sure that it is accurate, that it is all these things? And we're also forcing them a little bit to, yes, run fast, but also check in on what you're writing, because we don't want anyone writing stuff that's not going to be able to be used in real life. The other piece to it is that I think to say that this is a drain on their energy, I think that's also just the shift that we're trying to achieve is how do we make sure that we are supporting them in learning and growing and developing so that it doesn't become such a drain that they're not able to function in that core role. So looking at the competencies and looking at who is the right candidate, who are the people that we're trying to really target when we go out and hire, to look for that person that is more evolved or a person that can evolve and can grow into that. Now, are you going to have those hardcore engineers that need to go into a room and write code and not think about QA? Of course. And that's where you have a blend of people on the team to make sure that you are successful in what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to build. From a QA perspective, this is also, I liken it to the US. In the US, we have had so many conversations over the years of, and this will go back in time a little bit of, hey, you're no longer a coal miner. You need to go learn computers, or you need to go learn whatever skill set it is, because we no longer have that role as a thing in the United States anymore. And that's a global viewpoint as well, that some of these jobs just will become obsolete. And so retraining, reskilling, upskilling people and giving them what they need to develop those skills, to grow those skills. And we've actually seen some great upskilling of talent from that SDET group that they have been excited about. Let me learn how to actually write code or to look at code and think about code differently than I have as a QA person. There's a couple of layers there to the answer where it's not just you're right. Hey, hey, this is your new thing that you're going to do and good luck and God bless. No, we're going to give them the tools and make sure that we have supported them in their growth and their development, because this role won't be a thing anymore in this future environment that we're working in.
So I was going to get annoyed with you because you started talking about, hey, sometimes you need to go find those people that fit the new profile. And as somebody who's done their research on retention and turnover, I was going to get annoyed because it's always more expensive to bring people into the organization than it is to develop your own. But then you mentioned the part about, hey, we're investing in development. So tell us a little bit more about how development plays a bigger role now in terms of your overall talent strategy, especially when you're figuring out how AI impacts talent strategy and also where your talent needs to develop to get you to the next stage.
Yeah, it's a multi-layer approach where we have training, of course, our learning and development team who are helping people just to learn how to write code. We're using things like Udemy and other tools just to give them the core basics of how do you go out and learn a new coding language or that type of thing. But it's also about doing things like peer coding and having them work with engineers every day that they have already worked with these folks and have relationships. So they're able to be more vulnerable to say, how do I learn this new skill set? How do I grow my skills in this area that haven't been something that I've done in the past? And being able to give them that opportunity to develop the skill sets, giving them tools such as training, like truly training modules, et cetera. But then also giving them the opportunity to say, I don't get this and I need more help. Ask their manager, talk to their manager. And I think it's a lot about, again, that conversation around development, building out the development plans, having the vulnerable conversation of, I don't get this or this doesn't make sense to me, where they can work with their manager and get other tools and other resources to help them if there is an area that they're just not getting.
So tell me a little bit more about how you've baked in this development mindset across the employee lifecycle.
So we're really looking at each role, what the competencies are for that role. So we started with kind of a career framework overall of what is the career framework? What does it look like to be an engineer? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we have now started to really focus on those competencies and aligning competencies to the role to say, what are those skill sets? What are those competencies that someone needs to become a great engineer or a great marketing person or whatever it might be? And aligning those competencies to really say, what can we do? And also, what level of competence do you need at what level of role? Being an HR person, you might not need coding languages or you might not need certain competencies, but obviously you do if you are an engineer. And so, looking at all of that and looking at that competency framework, then we're able to develop specific training that's targeted to what those competencies are, giving them tools and not to say, I am not a spokesperson for Udemy, but giving them things like Udemy and other courses to say, how do I do this and how do I learn this skill set? But then also talking about our specific products. We have a platform that we're building out and it's a work in progress to really go deep into what is this product? How does it work? How does the partner or customer use it? All of these pieces so that people can dig in, even if it's not their role to go out and build the thing, but be able to sell it, be able to talk about it, be able to learn more about it. It's a lot of different tools and support that we're giving them. And the biggest thing, though, is that manager alignment, that manager conversation and open discussion with their team member to say, hey, I get this, or no, I don't get this. And there always is the opt out. If this isn't something that someone wants to do or they're not comfortable, then we look at, okay, what other role might be available inside the organization? And sometimes there isn't a role in the organization. And then we talk about what is a respectful and professional exit and all that good stuff and make sure that we're being thoughtful about keeping that person safe and whole as they exit the company.
This has been a fantastic conversation so far. If you haven't already done so, make sure to join our community. We're building a network of the most forward-thinking HR and people operations professionals who are defining the future. I will personally be sharing news and ideas around how we can all thrive in the age of AI. You can find it at gocleary.com/Cleary-community. Now back to the show.
So when I hear all of the things that you're saying and compare it to what we've often seen and heard out there in the media. Oftentimes, when an organization is going hard into the AI space, it's usually some CEO passing down an edict about we're going to be AI first. And oh, by the way, X number of people are going to get fired, and then the rest of you better be thankful and proving your worth every single day. All of this talk about development and investment and training runs counter to those narratives that we've heard far too often. Where did that come from? Because if I'm a CEO who is not aware or not deep in the AI, I would be sitting there and thinking, oh, this is an efficiency play. We can get rid of a bunch of people and pad our bottom line and not have to worry about continuing to invest in training, development, and all this other stuff. So your approach sounds completely different than what we typically see in the headlines out there. What's the root of that? How did that philosophy come to take shape in this company?
So I'm going to first say that I think, yes, CEOs have looked at this as an efficiency play, and we've seen how that has played out very recently at Google. You can see how that played out. And so I think there's that piece that we are keeping in mind. And we have such deep knowledge of our products within our teams that it's actually to our benefit, much like you mentioned earlier, to train someone versus hire a new person that doesn't have that product knowledge or that knowledge, historical knowledge of what has happened with the product, how the product works, all of this good stuff. And we are in the hosting industry and thinking about how the hosting industry has evolved. And so there's a lot of different pieces. And I think it's a combination of the two. I don't think it's, oh, we're going to train everyone up and they're all going to be perfect at AI in a month. We have also brought in some amazing experts in the AI space and folks that can bring the rest of the team up to speed on some of these topics. But we're also doing things like opening up Slack channels and opening up spaces where people can go out and test new AI tools, test what's going on, try and learn how does AI impact my job, and giving them different ways to think about this. So yes, you could say we can save money short term, but I think the longer term, smarter play is develop what you have and build on what you already have, because they have that historical context and that knowledge that you can't replicate bringing in a new person.
So there's a component of what you're describing that I'm curious about, and we're going to get into the philosophical side again. So part of what we hear often when we're talking about AI is this conversation about human in the loop versus human in the lead. When you look at what you've done from a people strategy in service of this transformation, what's the mindset internally that's driving this? Is it in the loop or in the lead?
It's both. I won't use the yes and, but it is a little bit of a yes and, because the human in the loop, it's really that oversight, making sure we're being inclusive, making sure we have the context, making sure that we are thinking about all the right things. Human in the lead for me is more like that strategic direction, that strategic judgment. How do we make decisions? How are we thinking about decisions? So it's really that force multiplier, if you will, of humans are still driving and they're still the folks that are determining how do we think about different things. But when you talk about basically humans in the loop, this is, I think, more of those repetitive tasks where oversight is needed, and it's more of the keeping things on the rails. And then human in the lead is more of that strategic focus and making sure that the judgment of why are we doing something, why are we making certain decisions, the why behind it is really leading more of the conversation.
So you're in the process of making this transformation, and there's probably a lot of other things that you haven't discovered yet. But at this point in your transformation effort, what are the things that came up that caught you by surprise that you didn't anticipate?
So I'm going to say that caught our leaders by surprise, because I think one of the things that it's really taught our leaders a lot is that listening first is such a key component of leadership. So truly understanding, and I think leaders at a high level understand those pain points. They understand what the challenges are for their teams, but listening to their team members to hear a little bit more about what would help you from a tool or capability perspective. Then I think the second one is designing around what is the workflow, or how does this work today and how could it work better? So it's not forcing new workflows. It's designing around the current workflows and using the tech to accelerate it. Using real people in this conversation, I think it's not we're going to go off and do AI and then we'll come and deliver it to you and you'll use it. It's testing, it's iterating, it's having conversations about how does AI impact us? And again, this is also where we're finding mistakes or issues or concerns, because we want to make sure that we're testing and saying, is this tool is this way of working, is this workflow right? And looking at that. But then I think the other piece is not looking at one person to be the hero, looking at how all of us can be better and how can we all grow and develop our skill set. And then I think it's technology as the enabler. Technology as the tool, not technology leading the charge. People still need to be involved. People still need to be in front and center of the conversation. So those are some of the learnings that we have had. So myself plus the leaders. So it's not been, oh, HR is going up and doing this thing. We're all in it together and we're all focused on it. So it's about even looking at tools that have rolled out in the universe and in the industry of, oh, this is an AI tool that every developer should be using, going on and testing it and going, yeah, this isn't for us. And saying that's not something we're going to use. That's not something that works for our teams. So making sure that the tools solve the problems we have based on the listening conversations, based on what we're hearing from our team members, and then making sure that it actually in real life works for us.
So I like how you mentioned listening first as a key pillar in part of your transformation efforts. I think the problem that I have with that as just a general buzzword is that organizations do all sorts of listening exercises and then they fall over because they don't really act on what they hear. So tell me a little bit more about what you heard in those listening conversations that shifted your assumptions and ended up driving action across what you heard.
I 100% agree with that sentiment. And I always talk about this in being a traditional HR person in a lot of ways. The comment I've always said to leaders, if we can do any type of engagement survey, we can do all kinds of conversations and listen to people. If we don't act on it, it means nothing. And also people are going to quit telling us things. And I think that's such a key tenet to any team and any leadership and 100% for HR. Don't do an engagement survey unless you're going to actually take action on it. And I think the same thing applies here is that you have to act on what you hear. And the act can be, thank you for that feedback. We're not going to go in that direction, but we definitely appreciate that you shared that. And here's why we're going in a different direction. I think it's having the conversation, listening, and then from there, making informed decisions on how we take action. And those listening sessions come in a lot of different, it can be one-off conversations as you're stopping into an office for a visit. It can be in meetings. You hear something that you're like, tell me more about why that's not working for you or where the friction is. So leaders, I think, are doing a better job and team members are doing a better job of asking, where are those pain points so that we can discover, okay, here's this friction. How do we solve it? Is it something that we can get a tool to do? Is it something we need to change in how we work together, whatever that might be? And so I think there's a piece to this that's just however you can get the information from the team members, but that trust and that continuous feedback loop happens when you actually take action. And so I don't know if I answered your question, but I think it's a matter of you can get the information a lot of different ways. For me, I've always been someone that likes to go sit with people and have conversations. In this environment where we are in 51 countries, that makes it a lot harder. But however I can get the information, and even when it doesn't feel great. And when it's, hey, HR's not doing a great job of this, I still want to hear it so I can fix it or try to fix it.
So what I like about what you described is taking the listening exercise and using it as an opportunity to not only act, but also acknowledge what you're hearing from the audience, because that actually helps employees feel seen and heard about their concerns. What I'm curious about is when you go through any transformation initiative, you have some assumptions in your head about what you want to tackle first. What I'm wondering is when you take that listening exercise, at what point should you shift those priorities based on what you're hearing from the audience? Is there a threshold that needs to be met to reprioritize some of the sequencing or theory that you had going forward in the transformation? And if so, what should that threshold be?
So I'm very much a proponent of testing and iterating on any process. And I don't think it's oh, here's the threshold and then that was the thing or this is the thing. I think it's more a matter of taking in what you're hearing and pivoting, even if it's just a small pivot. If you're talking about, hey, we're going to throw out everything and start from scratch again, that's a different conversation. But I think if it's just, hey, we need to iterate, or hey, let's shift this slightly, or, hey, maybe this, I'm going to use the competency concept. Hey, maybe this competency isn't something we need for someone that's a new engineer or that's coming into engineering. So I think it's a constant iteration and priorities. I'm not silly. I know that priorities are constantly shifting in organizations. And I think it's listening to, again, what are our customers and partners saying that they need and driving from there. That's the first piece. But I don't think there's here is the point when we have to throw everything out. It's more a matter of let's continue to iterate and make adjustments. And it's almost when you're in a Scrum development environment that you're looking at, okay, we did this sprint. Here's our retrospective on that sprint, and here's what we're going to change for next time or what we might add to the next sprint to make it better. So it's looking at that kind of, I hate using the idea of like agile development, but being agile in how are we working and how are we making sure that we're doing what we need to do. So it's maybe slight pivots or shifts, but I don't know that we're going to throw everything out and start from scratch. It's really just priority shift depending on what might be going on in the world, in the external environment, all of these things.
So I think I'm actually glad that you brought in the concepts of agile development and those principles in the concept of a sprint, because it triggered something in my head. When you're looking at any sort of transformation, you don't have to go into it thinking that you have to eat the elephant all at once. You have the opportunity to break everything down into bite-sized pieces and see what works, test it, and iterate from there, which I think we all know that intuitively from a change management or project management perspective, but oftentimes we look at the big picture and we think, holy cow, that's really a big rock. How do we actually move it? And the key is to break it down into smaller pieces. So I think that the fact that you brought in the development principle, especially agile development principles, that helps put the right context in there. I want you to zoom out and I want you to think through this process of transformation that you've been on. And, we've put it under the umbrella of how you execute a people first transformation, and you're still in the process of that. So when you think through what you've done so far, what are the key things that you've picked up that's helped you move closer to success and execution that you didn't realize on the front end of this initiative?
Oh God, there's been a ton of things. So I think one of the pieces, and this is the future-proofing our entire industry and what we're looking at is when we think about the skills that are needed for now and for the future, they might not be the same. And making sure that when you're looking at historical roles, you're not just saying, oh yeah, those are the competencies and we're done. You're really going, what do we need for the future? I think doing a skills gap analysis of who do we have on the team now and who are we going to need in the future, back to that whole idea of who can we train and upskill, and then what do we need to go out and buy or bring into our talent pool. And also thinking about that in terms of being thoughtful about not waiting for the crisis point, but moving on this sooner rather than later so that we are prepared and ready to make this shift and make this transformation. Scalable learning is a big one because the traditional concept of going to a classroom for a week, learning whatever skill, that doesn't work in a remote first environment. And it doesn't work in today's environment either. You can't have people off their role for 2 weeks to go do a training. So really thinking about scalable learning and just-in-time learning, making sure that we're developing our leaders to be able to advise and make sure they really can help and support the team. And then also, I think making sure that when we think about internal mobility and we think about developing our team members, we're really thinking about what are the right pathways and where can they go next and how do we develop them? And then I think most importantly on my end, looking at the data. What is working? What feedback are we hearing? What are those engagement survey results? What are the performance trends? All of these things that we need to do as HR leaders, and just making sure that we're really in the data and analyzing the data in such a way that it gives us informed information to take back to the business to say, here's what we need to do now and next.
Great stuff, Katee. I'm sure there is a ton more that we can get into, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that are interested in continuing the conversation with you. What's the easiest way for them to get in touch with you to continue the conversation?
Thank you for asking. So I'm on LinkedIn, Katee Van Horn. Katee is spelled with 2 E's, so Katee. LinkedIn is my probably preferred method for you to get a hold of me. I'm also the co-host of the Inclusive AF podcast with Jackie Clayton. You can find us on all podcast platforms, so you can check us out there. So those are probably the easiest ways to get a hold of me.
Awesome stuff. So I appreciate you hanging out with us and sharing your journey and your thoughts specifically related to the transformation that you're going through. When I think about this conversation, this entire conversation is nested under the umbrella of how do you execute a people first technology transformation in the age of AI. And when you hear that phrase or hear that question, a lot of people might just think those are two different things. It's not possible. And you've demonstrated that it's an and statement, not an or statement, which has come up throughout this discussion. But if I'm looking at the key principles of what's necessary to pull this off successfully, there are 5 things that I think are worth noting if you're trying to do this yourself in your organizations. I think the first thing and most important thing is to listen first. You might have your own theory about how this is supposed to be pulled off, but that theory is divorced from the impact at the front line. So it's important to go through that listening exercise so you gather the necessary information to make an informed decision. The second aspect that I think is important, and this holds true for any transformation initiative, is to test your assumptions. You have a theory, you've heard from the crowd, you've heard from frontline employees. Be prepared to test the assumptions that your theory is built on, because if you aren't willing to do that, don't even bother with the listening exercise. The third element that I think is important is to pressure test what's really important. You might have an idea and people might have an idea of what we need, what we don't need. Understand that hasn't met the market yet. So test it out and iterate based on the data that you get and from the exercise of actually executing the things that you want to execute. The fourth thing, and especially when we're getting into the area of how you do this from a people first perspective, you need to demonstrate your commitment to the people on the team. And that starts from leadership and works its way down. So that shapes the conversations that you have at each level, and it gets down to the one-on-ones that you have at the employee level. If you're not demonstrating commitment to their success and their development, the transformation is going to take a completely different tone than the intent that you want it to take. And then the last piece of it is that you demonstrate your commitment by investing in development and training, because you're never going to solve this by hiring from outside the organization. You could theoretically do it, but it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. So if you want to do this in a people first way, you have to invest in developing your people and helping them shore up the gaps that they have as they transition into this new world of work. So there's a lot more than that just came out in this conversation, but those are the things that stood out to me. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. For those of you who've been listening to this conversation, we appreciate you hanging out. If you like the discussion, make sure you leave us a review on your favorite podcast player, and then make sure you tune in next time where we'll have another HR leader hanging out with us and sharing with us what they are doing to future-proof their landscape.
Hey, it's Thomas again. One quick question before you go. Are you and your HR team tired of answering the same employee questions again and again in Slack? If yes, our Cleary AI-powered Slack bot is here to help. It takes routine employee requests and answers it automatically while freeing up time for you to take on more important tasks. At the same time, it automatically builds up an HR knowledge base as you go. It's quick to set up, works right in Slack, and you can try it for free. Just head on over to gocleary.com/HR-chatbot to install it. It's again, gocleary.com/HR-chatbot. Thanks again.